There you go. We're live.
Terrific. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Outreach Noah's studies in Bereishis. Genesis, that is.
I was going to throw that back at you.
Wasn't thinking quick enough. Hey,
I,
Terry.
do- I do the
Now,
same thing. There's
I get
certain
used
words.
to you hear the words so often more than you hear the English, and you just tend to say them. So,
Right.
yeah,
And there's a lot of the Hebrew words I prefer over the English as I've over the years that I've studied because they just mean a whole lot more. Um, I've talked a lot about Amuna, and the difference between it and the English word faith. They have a few similarities, but they're the broad scope of Muna, English word faith can't touch it.
yeah.
For what people when they hear the word faith, especially in my neck of the woods in the South. But yeah.
I think
But
it's
good evening, everyone.
I think it's one of those words that you have to use in the Hebrew because it just encompasses a lot more than what people think it is by using
Oh
the
no,
English.
I agree 100%. I'm like one of the hold on. See, we got Linda coming in here. Let me
Yeah.
let her in here quick. Here we go. Um, yeah, one of the things I was studying and learning this week in this in the stuff that I'm been in for the past month. When you really looked at that whole section, I was just learning. I mean, like it spoke of Muna, and I'm all like, wow, you know. And it comes from the opposite side of the tracks, but the understanding was more about Muna than just regular faith. And so I'm finding out there's just several things like that just lines up so beautiful with the Hebraic mindset, and it's yet Greco-Roman, wisdom. So just and I liked how I don't remember which one said this, if it was Seneca or what, stated that wisdom was for everyone. That wisdom was for everyone. It wasn't for one particular group, and it all comes, of course, from them. The divine was a little bit different than what we understand, but in a way, it was correct. It all comes from the one who makes us. And so no matter where the wisdom comes from, and if the wisdom is truth and it lines up and it doesn't violate Torah, we know that the giver of that wisdom was Hashem, regardless of where it came from, whether it was the Buddhist or the Greeks, the Romans, those that sat in their little places in the mountains and went all day. The wisdom that comes out that's true to life. And I like it. I think it was Seneca that said that wisdom was for everyone, not for one particular group. And so I thought that was really interesting. And that's somewhat, Torah is similar to that, especially the seven laws is for everyone, but the whole complete Torah in itself is for Israel. It belongs to them. The Creator gave that to them. And we're going to get into Genesis here in just a second. But uh, Ronald, anything coming through on our emails? Anything we need to discuss? Any questions?
No, not tonight. And
All right.
if you do have those questions for us, email us at outreachnoah.com. No, outreachnoah@gmail.com would be a better
At
one. You'll get
gmail.com.
through.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
me. I sent an email the other day and left something off one of the body shops, and I was like, why didn't I hear anything back from them? I did something similar to that. I just left off one little bitty small pot, and it didn't pop up for about 3 days. I'm like, that your email didn't go through. Well, why didn't you let me know a little sooner than that? The customer was needing what I was sending.
I have a habit of sending texts, but forgetting to send the send button when I'm, in the social media platforms. And I come back 2 days later. Oh, it's still a draft. I didn't send that. Oh, well, better send it now, 3 days late.
Yeah, I think we all have those technology issues.
Yeah.
All this new stuff that's coming. All righty, tonight
Oh.
Well, let's go ahead and wait. So we've got Janice with us tonight and Veronica, our wandering Noahide, whatever you want to, whatever she wants to go by, our nomad.
Wandering Goy.
Yeah, there you go. And then Bob and Linda is with us tonight. And of course, Ronald, he's our Scotty down there running the engine for us.
I'm getting better at it too.
Hey, you know, practice makes perfect, as they say.
Yeah.
And you don't learn anything if you don't make a mistake. Somebody says they never made a mistake, never did anything. Think about that one.
Yeah.
Someone who's never made a mistake has never really did anything. It's the ones who make the mistakes who's doing a lot.
Yes. And they learn from it and improve on
Yep.
it.
Think about how many times Einstein, or not Einstein, but Edison had to make those bulbs. I think it was 200 and something like that before he got to the.
Yep.
All right, tonight we're going to just hone in here on verse 19 of Genesis chapter 3. This has really been building up to verse 19 when you go back to really like around verse 16. It starts building up in this direction where Hashem was talking to, just fall back here to 16. There's 15. Let's see here. Actually, yeah, starting probably about verse 15, it starts building. As if you go back and watch some of our videos, it starts building here. As it's talking to, as Shem is talking to the woman, talking to the man, what we've been finding out, like last week in verse 17 was really, really big. We find out that this quote curse, the word that's translated as suffering or whatever, we know it means renunciation now from Rabbi Hirsch's breaking down of the words, does not mean because you have sinned, but for your sake and for the sake of the rectifying of your ways is, and we're going to get a little more into that tonight, that we talked about in verse 17, where Rabbi Hirsch is showing us that the purpose of the curse upon the earth was to train man. It was part of man's education, and that's something we've never been taught and never thought of because we didn't know the Hebrew, we didn't know the original interpretations of the Hebrew from its original language. And so that's a big thing to understand now that we're seeing this curse that appears to be on woman and man wasn't. It was on the earth and on things, and it was for the sake of the rectification of our ways. It was for our training. And he's going to pick right back up in this in verse 19, where he says, where verse 19 says, by the sweat of your countenance shall you eat bread until you return to the ground from which you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust shall you return. Now, on a lighter note, I heard a really good one this week. There's a lady who was quoted that passage. She says, we've been told since we were young that, from dust we came, to dust we return. And she says, therefore, I refuse to dust the house because it might be relatives. That's just a little lighter one. I heard that one this week, and I'm like, oh man, that might be Uncle Joe that I'm sweeping with the Swifter. I'm like, people come up with some of the funniest stuff. It's interesting, some of the things that people can just, and it's nice that you can see a little bit of lighthearted in that, which we should be not worried or worried about death. We'll get into that some other time, but we should never fear death. It's the completion of the process that began at birth. When, like we learned earlier, when uh, Hashem told Adam, said, "Of the day you eat, you shall die." And a lot of everybody's been arguing over this whole situation, in a lot of different religions. Well, he didn't die, and is actually Rabbi Hirsch said they received the commandment to die. And I like how uh, Marcus Aurelius, who is a Stoic, an emperor of Rome, you know, he comes out and he just says that we die every day because what happened this morning is gone. Death overshadows us, and it's a process. And the day that we die, and we actually die, is the completion of the process. And so we should not really, it's just part of life. And we'll get more into that later when we get into some other passages. But it's something that we shouldn't fear. We shouldn't fear it because it's part of the process. And in this process, I like, Rabbi Hirsch says that the curse upon the earth is to train man. So everything that we're going through on the earth, not the planet, but the face of the earth, it's the stage where man, produces the acts of his life like a play. But this is where we're being trained. And death is just another doorway that we walk through in this life. But he says, by the sweat of your countenance, you shall eat bread. He says that let me look at this word, make sure I'm looking at the right word. The word sweat here, the root word from the word sweat is merely an expression of movement or exertion by strenuous movement of your countenance. Sweat in Ezekiel 44, the word sweat is used, and it exudes, is exhaled from the body, relating to shoots that grow up out of the earth. And he goes on, he says, your godlike countenance. And in Hebrew, the word for countenance is always in the root words that is face. It's the word for face. It says your godlike countenance, the seat of your intellect, the insight, it says, and the insight, your countenance that shines with divine light and expresses your mastery of the world, will now be burdened. This is what he's explained what God is saying here. Your godlike countenance that you created in the image of God, the seat of your intellect and your insight, your countenance that shines with divine light and expresses your mastery of the world, which was what Adam was told to do, to subdue the earth, to conquer it. We went through what all that means when we went through those passages. All of that will now be burdened with obtaining your daily bread. With your daily bread. It says, all the anguish of life, or of sorrow, which is that word renunciation that we, the root word to renunciate, is expressed in the little word lachem, or bread. Sustenance is called, the Hebrew word is to snatch and to secure, because it must be seized from nature, and it is called lechem, or bread. because it is gained in a social struggle, in a struggle that all of us experience. All of us experience this. And it's interesting with what they're talking about bread here. Because I never had thought about bread being like this. He says, if man were free to devote himself to his spirit and not only to obtain his daily bread, man would not struggle with man. And the issue of ownership would not be so critical. A man's life, however, depends on a piece of bread, which he can gain only through suffering, sorrow, renunciating. Man can only depend on a piece of bread that he gains through his sufferings, his sorrows. Hence, once he has wrestled a livelihood from nature, he struggles with fellow man to maintain possession of it. And sometimes he must struggle even before he has wrestled it from nature to prevent someone else from getting ahead of him at the source. So we see here in this struggle that we have with gaining our own bread, once we get it, we struggle with keeping it as a possession. And we can see what the bread can represent, especially in modern life, your money, your paychecks, your possessions, the things that you have, and like some say, the more you have, the more worry you have. The more worry you have to try to keep your possessions, because then he says you have to wrestle with man to maintain it. And then especially in this day in life, I imagine, Rabbi Hirsch lived 200 years ago, and it's, a lot different than, than what we have now in our technologies and our way of life, no matter where you're at in the modern world. Then you're wrestling with someone in what we call the rat race today, getting ahead of him, getting ahead of the source. Someone, that's trying to step over you to make the more money, push you down so you don't get that next promotion. So we see that this struggle for bread is part of this situation we're in. Is part of the training ground, because think about it, being everything we're going through to get bread, possess bread, and to struggle with those who want to take it, or struggle for those who wants to push you back so you can't have as much bread. Think about this as a training ground, as we just learned in verse 17, that the curse was for the benefit of training man. So, and everything you're dealing with, you're having to learn to deal with your emotions, your angers, your frustrations. All these things is part of self-disciplines. You can get angry. You can want to, take something that you feel that it was yours, that was taken away from you, that you robbed of an opportunity. Think of all these different things in struggling for bread, and where it trains us. It trains us in idolatry. Are you worshiping that bread? It trains us in blasphemy. Are you going to curse God because, of the bread you don't have, or the bread you wish you had, or the bread that got stolen? Are you going to steal the bread? Are you going to murder someone over bread? Look, this goes through all the 7 commandments, the Sheva mitzvahs, b'nai Noah. The justice, all of this struggle for bread gives us a training ground on how to live on earth, and how to live with God, and how to live with man. And it's not that it's a curse, but it's a training. And that's something that, that I'm learning as I'm studying Stoicism, that a lot of this training in managing yourself, managing what you can control and let go of the things you can't control is lines up so much with what we were talking about before about Muna. When we begin to learn to just concentrate on what is in our domain and what's not in our domain, let go. It takes faith to do that. It takes Muna to try to let go of those things that we think we can control, but we can't. And we get angry at this and angry, and that's something I've been working on. And I've printed 3 or 4 articles off this week, on dealing with this same thing, because I'm just give an example. There's several different sides of what's going on in the world right now. Wherever you're at, that's where you're at. And I find myself sometimes getting angry at certain situations. And I've had to think about that this week. Why am I getting angry and wasting, my breath, my peace of mind over something that's outside of my control? It's going to happen. The creator, he has willed it. That's one thing I love about the Bereishis. Everything that happens to us in our life is for our benefit. Everything that happens in our life is to our benefit. If we can't see it right now, it doesn't matter, but it's for our benefit. And so I've been looking at all these different things. I get angry about this over here, and this is stupid. And I just want to give my opinion. And that's one of the things I believe it was Seneca or Epictetus said, don't have an opinion. You don't need to have opinion on everything, because all it does is it breaks down and tears down your peace of mind. When something going on at work that you don't like, if someone's treating you in a way and you've got this opinion, and I've learned those people are going to do what they're going to do, and that's outside of our control. And sometimes it's just so hard to just not want to step back and take somebody's block off sometimes. But I'm learning that the more we can let go of that which we don't have control and let the creator who controls everything have his control, is an element of building biblical faith, emunah. The self-disciplines that I'm learning to try to work on myself all lead to emunah by giving God what's his and let me work on what's mine. And so we see here in this struggle for bread is that exact, it's telling us right here. There are things, if you got bread, now you got to wrestle, to keep the potential, the possession of it. We got to keep that possession. Well, sometimes that's out of your control. You've done all you can do to protect what is yours, your life, your possessions. But if somebody comes by and takes it, that's outside of your control. If you've done everything you can and you've given the rest of it over to God and say, God, I need your help here. I've done all I can do. Everything's out of this. And so as we look at, I think Veronica must have lost it. There we go. But if we look at this as this very first part here, by the sweat of your countenance you shall eat bread, is the stage in which God has placed you on to train you. You're going to learn faith. You're going to learn opportunities to observe the Shiva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 commandments that he's assigned to us. You're going to learn how to do what's called degenerates, which is the way of the land, is what the generation of the flood failed at. They failed at that first before they broke the commandments and brought the flood. And the degenerates is the things like your ethics and morals toward each other, toward the earth, toward society. When those starts declining, then the violating the major commandments comes in next. It's the stepping stones. And so we see here this eating by the sweat of your brow and gain your bread. Just in that little bit right there is a major, college of learning. that we go through. And we all going to go through it in our own ways in our different areas. They're tailored. Our training that we get from our creators tailor made for your life. And it says, until you return to the ground from it, you were taken. Now, the word that's translated where you taken implies a compulsion. As long as man belongs to himself, he is subject to the earth. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. God, however, releases man from the grip of the earth from which he was created and places him in paradise. In God's hand, in his domain, even what is taken from the dust is eternal. It knows no death. But when man withdraws from God's hand, and follows his own heart, he falls back and he goes to the way of the earth. Rabbi Hirsch says, the bread that you wrestled from nature and for which you struggled with your fellow man will not renew all your energies. It does not grow on the Etz Chaim, tree of life. The bread that you wrestle from nature and for which you struggle with your fellow man will not renew all your energies, for it does not grow on the tree of life. It sustains you for a while until you return to the ground. Only by God's, and I circled only by God's power were you released from the earth's grip. So once you're gone, you've been released from the earth's grip. Once you pass on. The curse upon the earth for which man's sake is the first instance in which we see that the thriving of the earth depends not only on sunshine, rain, and proper cultivation, but also on man's faithfulness to God, to God's command. That's one of the things when I first blog I wrote back in about 2010, I wrote a whole blog about that, about the climate change. I wrote about climate change in 2010 and how man is responsible for climate change, but it has nothing to do with internal combustion engines. It has everything to do with obedience to commandments. Because as we learn in Genesis, when man tarries from God, the earth tarries from him. The earth only returns to man when man returns to God. So, yes, we are having climate changes. Yes, we are having weird storms, but man's actions and that he is doing that is immoral, unethical, and violating the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, which we will see when we get to Genesis chapter 9 in the covenant of the rainbow. Every time you see a rainbow, we're going to learn this. It is a sign that the 7 commandments have been broken and we are worthy of a flood. But the rainbow, on the other side of the rainbow, reminds God not to do it. And we got a ways to go, but I'll go ahead and share this with you. When the rainbow is like this, it reminds us to repent. We have violated the commandments. We're worthy of a flood. We're worthy of destruction. But on the other side, as the great sages of Israel says, it resembles a bow that's being carried. It's not being shot. God's carrying that bow. He's not shooting at us with we're talking about metaphorical. He's carrying it, but he's not shooting at us because he sees it. He sees it and he remembers his promise to Noah and the earth. But our side of it should remind us, because the whole deal, when it shows up, when we read the passages, when that shows up, the scripture specifically says the bow appears when the cloud that he has put there, that cloud can bring destruction. And so when that cloud appears, that means destruction is coming. The bow appears and reminds us there's a covenant, but also reminds us of why there has to be a covenant. Because when you look at the generation of the flood, when we see a bow, all the elements of the generation of the flood is going on. But God's put that bow there to say no. On his end, he says no. For us, it's to look up and say, oh boy, here we go again. We need to change our ways. And we'll talk a whole lot more about that when we get to Genesis 9. So I hope this will tease some people along the way that want to hang around. It's going to be a while till we get there, but our covenant with God, the Gentiles, especially the Gentile nations, that's our covenant. Israel has theirs from Mount Sinai. Ours comes from Genesis chapter 9, when God talking to Noah and his descendants, and that's who we are, the B'nai Noah, the descendants of Noah. And so we're learning here that the earth changes. It does change. There is climate change. But it's not internal combustion engines and coal factories. We do have a responsibility of taking care of the earth. That falls within every mean high, not to eat meat taken from a living animal. We get sub teachings from that commandment that was given to Noah after the flood about taking care of the earth. We have a responsibility taking care of the earth. That doesn't mean we can just do a free-for-all like has been happening. But there is climate change because it says right here, only by God's power were you released from the earth's grip. And he's talking about here that as long as we're on this earth, we're going to be battling. And the curse of the earth for man's sake, he says, for instance, which we see in the thriving of the earth, it does not depend on the sunshine, cultivation, rain, but on man's faithfulness to God's command. That alone tells us that's the climate change factor. And as I learned in 2010 when I was studying, I just come across this in an introduction of a book that I had from this one rabbi. And he's talking about the passage there that when man in Genesis early on, when we verse 5 or so, I can't remember, that when it talks when there was no man on the earth to pray for the rain. In that passage, he talks about how when man come along, he says there was no, all the vegetation that we read about early in Genesis was actually still under the earth. And it said it hadn't grown because there was no man yet. And the sages of Israel says there was no man yet. And there was no man, there was no prayer for the vegetation to grow. And so that's the first instance we learn in Genesis where man and nature has to work together. And then now after the fall of man, when he ate of the wrong thing of the tree, we start learning that the curse was on the earth. And again, it's brought in greater detail of how the earth reacts with man and how man reacts with the earth. And it all depends on how close man is with God, how close he is. The further man is, the further our societies are and our nations is from the Creator, the God of Israel, the more climate change we got going on. But as we start turning toward the Creator, the earth begins to change. It starts returning back to its Genesis state. And there's, early in Genesis, we learn this. We're learning that right now here in this passage. Rabbi Hirsch goes on, he says, once the Torah was given to Israel, harmony began to be restored to the world. In Eretz Israel, the land of Israel was to become a paradise on a small scale. And this is so true. When Israel was the example of the rebirth of what man was supposed to be like. Not in all the separate commandments that they've got, because they're not, all that stuff's not given to us, but it was in the observance of what they were told to do. That was the principle. When Israel did what they were supposed to do. Matter of fact, in the Talmud, there's a section there. It talks. I can't remember. It's like 14 years. It tells how many years that there was not the appearance of a rainbow in the land of Israel when Israel walked with God. There was not an appearance of one rainbow in the land. That's recorded history in Israeli history. And when Israel didn't follow God and they were banished, finally Judah was banished. The land died. People still live there. People always have lived in the land of Israel. But you couldn't grow nothing. It was desert. I mean, even Mark Twain, when he went there, he was like, you read what Mark Twain wrote about the land, it was just desolate. Israel, the Jewish people, is the soul of the land. The land is the flesh, and the people is its soul. And when the soul left, it died. Just like our bodies, when our souls leave, it dies. But when they started coming back, the earth that's there, in that acreage of land, does miracles. I mean, just like in Tel Aviv alone, what they did in 50 years took hundreds of years for cities in the United States to get that big with that kind of infrastructure. They did it in 50 years. When I went there in 2003 and I was going through the Shuck, which was amazing. I tried to take pictures, but you can't take a picture of atmosphere. It's just, it's amazing. It's just huge, open, under the tent market would make Walmart look like Dairy Queen. I mean, it was just massive with everything. It had places of study. It had anything in life that you would need, and all the foods and all the different kinds of foods you wouldn't believe. And I was going down through there, and I bought a bag of shelled pecans and was eating on them, and stopped at this one booth, and these things were like this big around, and they were red. And I'm like, they was big as a tennis ball. And I'm like, wow. I asked the guy, I said, what are these? He goes, they're radishes. I said, no, they're not. Radishes are this big. I cut them up and put them in my salad. He goes, no, these are radishes. And he said, oh, by the way, here's some more radishes. And they were bigger. I'm like, how do you get those radishes so huge? He went like that. The abundance that land grows will blow your mind. You could literally, our guide even showed us, and he was an archaeologist guide. You can go out there on bare ground and just pour water on the just bare dirt, and you can stand there in a few minutes. You'll start seeing it wiggle, where life starts coming out of it. It's wild, and that's what Israel was to be, the new paradise. The land was to be an example. The land and the people is to be the light unto the nations. This is what life can be like. That's what that light of the nations means. This is what life and following God's commands can be like. And it's amazing when you see it and you read the histories. But he says, thus the Torah's assurance of blessing refers to this world. The way leading back to paradise is laid down and prescribed in the Torah. And that's why we of the nations had to be taught, because the Torah was given to Israel. It's their possession, their covenant. But there's places in there for everybody. And so the priests have to share that with us, what's for us and what's not for us. Too many people want to pick up the 5 books of Moses and read them like it was written to them. Nah, I wasn't there, 3,000 something years ago when God said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of slavery and the house of bondage. So that's the beginning of the quote 10 commandments. That's for Israel. It's part of their covenant. It's not for us. We have the seven. As a matter of fact, they were pre-given. They've been since Adam. The Torah didn't replace them, it upholds them. And that's because it's not passed down from the descendants of Noah by mouth like it was originally from father to son. Now we get it from Moses, who God gave it to Moses, and then Moses gives it to Israel, and Israel is to give it to us. And once you start understanding Torah, it's plain, it's there. Ronald, would you wave in your hand? Okay.
I was moving my microphone.
Any questions or anything come up? I know
No,
I've covered.
no, we're good to keep going.
Okay. Any questions from the Zoom room? Okay. He goes on, for this reason, the correspondence between the earth on the one hand and the deeds of man on the other is most manifest in Eretz Israel, and it is destiny as revealed. And he throws in a Hebrew word. It's destiny. Destiny is revealed in the earth. But what Israel was supposed to be was to be the example of man observing God's commandments that was given to him. Israel was given 613 commands in the Torah. The nations are given 7 because the mission inside the land of Israel is different than the mission it is inside Wisconsin or Nova Scotia or Singapore. We have a different mission. We're to settle the earth and make it, make harmony. It takes 7 days a week to work the workings of this planet. Where Israel is the priestly nation. They have their times off, but that those times off that God set before them is for them to appear before Him in service. We don't have that, and it's not that we're not worthy of that, and not that we can't have any times off. We can have times off, just not for religious reasons, because we're not to create a new religion. But our mission, as Rabbi Hirsch says, and I covered it when we covered Genesis chapter 1, 11, and 12 on the law of species. Israel is a species. The nations is a species. They have two. Yes, we're both man, but just like an oak tree and a pine tree, they're of the nation. They're the species of tree, but they're two different trees with two different purposes. And so that's the way it is. There is segregation in the Torah, and we are segregated, or Israel's actually segregated from us. Israel is like Eve. Eve was taken from man, from Adam. And so Israel was taken from the nations. Very similar. And they're to be the light of the nations. They're to be our helpmate. They help us do what we need to do. I mean, I heard a beautiful speech today when I was at lunch from Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, talking about the hand-in-hand working that Israel and the United States is doing right now. That it's a divine thing that's going on there. And that's the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be Israel and the nations working together. They do their part, we do our part. And Rabbi Hirsch covers that in Genesis chapter 1. And so they are the light of the nations. So when we look to Israel, as Israel returns, which they're not in the fullness of their return yet, but it's coming. It's more and more before our eyes. And the more they return to the land, the more the land becomes the living body that it's supposed to be, the living earth, just like it was in Gan Eden. And then we as the nations, we look upon that as an example and say, well, we need to do what we're supposed to do. And when we do, our lands will flourish. When we observe our commandments, our lands will flourish. It will produce what it's supposed to produce. Our lives will produce what it's supposed to, and it will be Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden on earth, when both groups are doing what they're supposed to do. And again, Rabbi Hirsch covers that. We can come back later and look at that again sometime. But it's Genesis 11 and 12, 1, 11 and 12, where he talks about the law of species. And it's very beautiful. You'll learn who you are in the creation of God. Where are you at in your creation? He created you. Just like the tree in your front yard, the flower in your garden. He created that. Well, he created you too. And he has a purpose and a mission for you individually. And it's all given for us. He says great importance is attached to the following. Further observation says the divine judgments directs a curse at the earth and at the serpent. But this judgment contains not a hint of a curse against man. Now we're going to be getting into something very important. The divine judgment directs a curse at the earth and at the serpent. I'll let him in. There we go. The divine judgment directs a curse at the earth and at the serpent, but there is no judgment, not even a hint of a judgment against man. Man is not cursed in any way. Nothing was changed in man's lofty calling or in his ability to fulfill it. Only the external conditions, only the stage on which he is to fulfill his mission was changed. And even this happened only for his own good. The mission itself, his divine calling and his ability to fulfill it, has not changed one iota. And we're going to see that even more when we get into Genesis chapter 4 with the conversation God had with Cain. We're going to get it straight from the lips of the Creator. Well, he doesn't have lips, but you know what I'm saying metaphorically. To this day, every newborn infant emerges from God's hand in purity, as did Adam in his first time. Every child comes into this world pure as an angel and to live and to become a man or a person. This is one of the cardinal points in the Torah of Israel and in Jewish life. Again, our example of what's to be. But what a miserable, this is going to get a little in face here. But what a miserable and hopeless picture of man is drawn by those who err and deny his purity on the basis of the story of the Garden of Eden. They have concocted a lie that undermines the moral future of mankind. We are referring to the dogma of original sin, on the basis of which they have built a spiritual struggle against the Jew and must protest, and also the Noahide, those of us who have accepted our commandments of God and walks beside Israel. Must with every fiber, against the Jew, must protest with every fiber in its being. And yes, we protest. We protest the lie of original sin, that man is born in sin and he's helpless and there's nothing he can do about it. It's a full-blown lie. It is a lie for mass control, so that you'll look at yourself that there is nothing that you can do and you will be controlled by these religions out here in the world that are cultish in this lie, that is opposite of what God has said. It is true that on the account of sin in the Garden of Eden, all of Adam's descendants inherited the task of living in the world that no longer smiles at them as it once did. But this is only because this same sin is still being committed over and over again. Rabbi Hirsch goes on and says, however, the express purpose of the present conflict between man and earth and of man's resultant training and renunciation is to guide man toward moral perfection, which will pave the way for his return to paradise. Let me say that again. However, the express purpose of this present conflict that we have in the earth, man and man, is the training of renunciation that we've talked about in the past few weeks. It is a guide that guides man toward moral perfection, which will pave the way of his way back to paradise. But to say that because of original sin, sinfulness is innate in man, that man has lost his ability to be good and is now compelled to sin, these are notions which are against the Torah, raises its most vigorous protest. Is it the loss? Man has lost the ability. This lie that man has lost his ability to be good, and is now compelled to sin. These are the notions which, against the Torah, raises its most vigorous protest. The Torah protests this idea. When you go back to the original language and the original understanding of verse, this is why Genesis is important. Years and years ago, before I didn't know anything about this path, nothing about this. And I told my wife one day, I somehow got attracted to the conversation that God had with Cain. And that's all I did. I read those two verses over and over for years. And one day, walking out of the house, headed to work, I was in the heating and air, and I was about to go get my service truck. And I said, I don't understand what I'm about to tell you, but I said, Genesis has the answer to life, and I'm going to find it. And it may have taken me 15, 20 years, but I found it. Our answer to life is in Genesis when we learn what it is telling us. It's opposed. Genesis opposes all these religions on the planet because it was the Torah, the living Torah given to Israel. It's been kicked out of other religions. These books have been kicked out, mistranslated, misinterpreted. Said man, Rabbi Hirsch goes on, says, man as an individual and man as a whole can at any time return to God and to paradise. On earth, we can do that right here. We don't have to wait till we pass through that final door and go to the other side. We can return right now to God and to the earth. King David in Psalms 145 tells us that God is near to all of those, everyone who calls upon him and calls upon him in truth. He has no, hand over his ear when somebody over in a foreign land cries out to him. Maybe they don't even know that they're crying out to him. In Psalms 145, he says, compassion is on all of his creations, all of his creatures. Psalms 145 is a very important chapter. One day we'll go through that passage again. There's 150 words in that psalm in the Hebrew. And the sages teaches us that psalm represents everything that all the psalms say, because there's 150 psalms. And Sages says that Psalms 145 accumulates and puts down everything that all the Psalms have to say, is culminated into that one Psalm. And there's 150 words, one word for each chapter of a Psalm in that one Psalm. It is so important the Jews pray it 3 times a day. That particular Psalm. It's my favorite. I've got a little bitty Tehillim, little bitty book of Psalms over here that I really like, put out by Feldheim, and it's a pocket size. And there are times when I got to get that out, and I go through it. Really recommend you to read and meditate on Psalms 145. It's a very important psalm. Toward this end, man needs no medium. We don't need anyone between us and God. That's another misnomer. And no, Moses wasn't between God and the nations of Israel. A lot of people want to throw that out there. Well, Israel had Moses. No, he did bring the commandments from God and give to Israel, but for an individual Jew, Moses does not stand between them and God. Every Jew is responsible for their own relationship, and so are we. We're all responsible for our own relationship. There's no mediator. Doesn't have to be. That's an insult. Toward this end, man needs no medium other than the devotion and duty which is within the capacity of every human being. Toward this end, there is no need for an intermediary who has died and then been resurrection. This is an attest by all of Jewish history, from which we learn in the subsequent generations that God drew near to man of purity as he did Adam, the first man. Had to look at the Hebrew on that one. Adam, the first man. Sometimes Rabbi Hirsch puts the Hebrew word in there, and and there's no vowel points, so I have to look at it for a second. Before the sin, I'm going to read that again. This is a testament to all of the Jewish history, because people have tried to destroy them. Just like the war we're in right now is because of a group said they were going to annihilate them. Once they got the nuclear bomb, they were going to wipe that piece of land off the map. Well, you don't talk about that to God's people. God's brought his people to take care of that. And it happened at Purim. Haman has died again, as it did in the book of Esther. The whole book of Esther is read at this time of year, and all this, and it's really interesting that the main leaders over there, in the middle of his name was the name Haman. It's really interesting. From which we learn that in subsequent generations, God drew near to men of purity as he did the first Adam before the sin. Abraham, Moses, Yeshayahu, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Jeremiah, and others like them attained God's nearness simply by their faithfulness and duty, not by. And when they say by their faith, that's what emunah is. Emunah is an action word, not a belief, not a thought. That's the difference between emunah, even though it's translated as faith. But faith denotes, and here, at least in my part of the world, faith denotes belief, and belief can bring doubt. But emunah has an element of belief in it. But the strongest part of emunah teka, your emunah, is this right here. It is faithfulness to duty. That's where your faith is at. When you do what God says and you see how God responds, and then your belief grows stronger. But really, before your belief, there needs to be the duty. The first principle of the Torah that the Jews teaches is the one free God goes hand in hand with the second principle, namely namely the pure and the free man. The pure and the free man. The dogma of original sin is the most regrettable error of an alien faith. It is alien from the Torah. They think that in consequence of this sin, sinfulness is innate in man, and that man can be saved only from the curse of sin only by the virtue of belief in a certain fact. It says, in the story of the Garden Eden, however, there is no mention of a curse against man. Again, the misinterpretation from translation. It fails us all the time. To this day, every Jew, every Israelite vows before God, and this is a prayer that I had learned when I was studying with them. My first rabbi taught me. The soul that you have given me is pure, and it is up to me alone to keep it pure and to return it to you in its original state of purity. That is a prayer that they pray every morning. It's part of the morning prayers. The soul that you have given me is pure, and it's up to me alone to keep it pure and to return it to you in its original state of purity. It puts the responsibility on us to obey God's commands of purity, the purity of the soul. Rabbi Hirsch goes on, he quotes a passage from Bereishis Rabbah 5:6. It's one of the holy writings of Israel. It says, in every age, in every generation, a man is capable of ascending the highest levels of morality and spirituality. Rabbi Hirsch goes on and says, let us note the earth was cursed for man's sake. And as man's degeneration increased, so did the curse upon the earth. As we said, as man degenerates, climate changes. If you want to fix climate change, you get out here these nut holes that's trying to ask for money to change it. No, you start telling them you need to start turning to the God of Israel, the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the only way you're going to fix the climate. It's the only way we're going to fix this world is when we turn back to God. The earth as it is today is not the same as it was in the past, as it will be and as it will be in the future. According to an analogy between Earth's present condition and its conditions at the time of creation is unfolded, and it is based on a false premises. The same is true with the case of man. Man was disturbed from his state of tranquility, and he must struggle to wrestle a livelihood from a hostile nature. But man, as he is today, is not the same as he was in the original state of tranquility, and as he was in living conditions similar to that tranquility. An analogy then between man and as he is now and man as he was then is unfounded. When Israel was settled on its land under the influence of God's Torah, the land resembled paradise on a small scale. Israel then produced a godly men like Eliyahu, Elijah, and Yeshayahu, Isaiah, and Elisha, and the other prophets of Israel, who held to God, who beheld God and heard His word, and they were men of flesh and blood. They were mortals, and they were born mortals, born to mortals. And then he ends verse 20 with this statement right here: to refine and to elevate earthly life and to bring life near to God and to His presence. That is the essence of God's Torah and the essence of the divine rule. And that's what we get from verse 19. That's why I held it off just to be by itself. There's a lot there, but there's a lot of hope right there. And man, it lines up with Genesis 4:7 so well with what he brought out when we get to that on down the road here in a few weeks. All righty, Ronald. How's it going?
Good. Very good, Terry. Yes. Teaching us to return, live moral, ethical, helping one another, creates a new earth.
It creates and it fixes. It fixes things.
Creates a dwelling place that Hashem would be pleased to be in. And that's what the aim is from the start.
Yep.
To complete the earth into a paradise that's fitting for Hashem.
Yeah. And we don't need scientists to figure that out. Anywhere, that's what the whole state of Israel was to be about and what it's going to be in the future when God brings all of them home. Israel will shine like the light of a lighthouse to the nations. That's why it says in the Torah that there's going to become a day that out of Jerusalem shall flow the Torah like a mighty river, a stream that's going to go out into the nations, and it's going to feed the nations of clean, pureness, but it's going to come from Jerusalem. It's there. It's prophesied in the prophets that this is going to happen. Isaiah chapter 2, I think, is either 1 verse 2 or chapter 2. It says the nations that are left will flow in to Jerusalem, to the mountain of the temple of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways and we will walk in his paths. They're coming in, but they're going to be going back home with what they learn.
Yes.
Israel and Jerusalem will return one day and be the light unto the nations as it was set up to be. It will be our glimpse into the Garden of Eden, of the way it was on that first couple of weeks when God created everything. He planted that garden. We're going to see that. And that river out of the garden, the Torah will flow and it will feed and nourish the nations. Just like the rivers that flowed out of the Garden of Eden. And I think we remember when we covered that when that river flowed, as it left the garden, it broke off into 4 head rivers that was feeding the planet from what was inside the garden. That's what Isaiah is telling us when the nations will flow in to Israel and flow into Jerusalem. And when they say we're going to go to the mountain of, in the temple of the God of Jacob. He's going to teach us his ways. We're going to walk in his paths. And then they're going to flow back out of there. They're going to go home to wherever they're at, Germany, Asia, the United States, whatever the nations are called at that time. They're going to go home, and that river is going to flow with them. And out of that garden, the land of Israel, it will nourish all the lands of the earth. And it will all flourish from what's coming outside of from inside the garden. It's a beautiful thought when you look at the passage and what God is saying. That's what he's saying. What's inside that garden going on in there, the blessing and the beauty is going to flow out of there, and it's going to flow into the earth. It's going to take that which was inside there with it. It's going to be healthy and pure. It's called the Torah.
Yep.
Go ahead, Ronald.
Water and Torah. Water gives life.
Actually,
and Torah
water
gives
is one
life.
of the Yeah, water is one of the nicknames of Torah
Yeah.
in the
The sport
sages
that
of
gives life.
Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually nicknamed as water, time.
Yeah.
And so I mean it brings life. So mayim, I mean mayim is the word for water, which is interesting again, but I won't go there. We already gone past time.
No, no, excellent teaching. Very explanatory. Food for thought.
This is why I love the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noah. It's why I love Genesis. It's Veronica and them all know how long I talk about Genesis. I mean, it's either Genesis or Star Trek leads every conversation comes to that. And I can bring Genesis. In fact, I taught some stuff about Genesis from Star Trek one night years ago.
Yeah. Well, anybody in the Zoom room got any questions? Go ahead, Janice.
I've just been, it's not a question, but it's a comment. I've just been feeding on all the beautiful things that you've been saying, Terry, and very touched by it all, and thinking of how amazing it would have been to have been taught like this from a little girl or a little boy, and to have grown up with this, and to instead to have had all the interpretations that we had that just fed upon us over and over and over again, that we're all sinners, and you know, all the gospel story that we've been fed with, and I'm still continuing to be fed with from my family. And so just very thoughtful. You know, it's all so beautiful, and yet millions and millions in our world are just brought up with all the lies and false interpretations and so on. So I'm just reminiscing about life.
I do the same thing, and I would sit underneath, and I got to spend a couple of weeks with my first rabbi when I was studying to join Israel. Um, I just there was a time we went. He would introduce me to stuff, and he took me to this synagogue over in Brooklyn called Emunis Israel. And if I had converted and become part of them, that's where I really wanted to go. It was a younger, but they were so exuberant. And we went over there, what's called Kabbalat Shabbat. That's bringing in the Sabbath. It was on a Friday night, and we walked over there. And we went in and we sat down at the back table. And at the time, David was in his 70s. He's in his 80s, pushing 90s now, because this was in 2010-ish when when I was in my first, this is when my first steps. And I will never forget the experience I had that night. I'm sitting there on the back table and I'm against the wall. My rabbi is sitting there. He's in his 70s, and they're singing in Hebrew the prayers that's welcoming in the Sabbath. And he's got his tallit over his head. He has his hands like this on his heart, and tears are running down his eyes.
Mm.
And I've not shared this in a long time. I had this experience as I was looking out as an orphan child that had been brought into a family and wrapped in a blanket.
Mm.
And I just sat there and wept.
Mm.
It was amazing.
Mm.
And people don't know the real Jews. The ones who hate them, they don't know them. They don't know the heart they have for God. And there's a video, Ron, I watched that video this morning before I left work. The one that you posted. If you get a chance to watch that, when the chief rabbi Safat, where my former chief, or not former, but my present teacher, Pesach Sherbo lives, the chief rabbi of that village, it's one of the 4 holy cities of Israel. And he made a comment that the Arabs are leaving the Temple Mount. And I'm like, I hadn't really heard about it. And what this chief rabbi said was that there are Jews that are going up there and they're prostrating themselves on the Temple Mount, and it's scaring the living daylights out of the Arabs.
Mhm.
And that the Arabs are saying when they see Israel prostrate, sorry for the misuse of words there, but prostrate before God, they know they're in trouble. They fear God when the Jew prostrates himself at the Temple Mount. And I was sitting there just awestruck. This wasn't a reporter saying this. This was the chief rabbi of Safat, one of the 4 holy cities of Israel. And I'm like, if people could just, I've got a Jewish friend that lives in New Jersey. He's a Levite. He always tells me, if the temple starts getting built, they're going to call me and give me my duties. He's will be one of the workers of the temple. He said, I might be carrying bricks. I don't know what I'll be doing, but they'll tell me what I'm supposed to do. He's a Levite. And he sends me pictures of all the time. He sent me a picture of him and his family dressed in their Purim stuff. They were all dressed up like cowboys, and it was really kind of cool. And he'll send me, last week he sent me a picture of their Shabbat table. And I told him, I said, one day I hope to be able to sit down there at the table with you. And because now we have direct flight from Chattanooga up into that area. So it's really be easy to fly up there now. Before it wasn't. But he's always send me pictures of in the shul after he's praying, and the rabbi's holding the Torah up, and I know what they're singing because I've been in the shul when they do that. He sends me these pictures, and so a few weeks, and I always send him a Shabbat Shalom on Friday before sundown. And the other day I sent him one, and I said, I just want to thank you that you're obedient to your covenant, because if you was not obedient to your covenant, I can't be obedient to mine. We've never met. We've known each other for a long time. I don't even remember how we met. Met online somehow, and we only chat. And hopefully one day I'll get up there and get to meet him and his family. But if the people could understand the real Orthodox Jews, the ones who are, and they hate the word Orthodox. They prefer Torah. They're Torah Jews. They observe the Torah according to what they've been commanded. And if we really knew them, if the people really knew them and knew them by their hearts, they would not hate. You can't. That night that I saw my rabbi sitting there holding his hands and he's singing a song, bringing in the Sabbath, and tears was running. This was pure. This was pure. It wasn't imitation. And I looked around and there were so many other people doing similar things, in bringing in the Sabbath, for them. And man, the world is going to be such a great place when we can get past all this hate.
Okay.
Matter of fact, what was it? I don't. There's a statement that Marcus Aurelius wrote in his book of Meditations, that he said something in the line of being kind to, like, the kindness. Hold on, let me see if I got it right here. I'll end on this note if I can find it real quick. There's something that's been on my mind because of sometimes we have difficult people that we work with, and I think I highlighted it here in something that I printed off. I may not have just been reading so much like I normally do. Something. Let me find it. I know I highlighted it. Talking about being, just being kind, because there's so much unkindness in the world that we don't need to add to it. And this came from a Roman emperor. Um, oh yeah, right here. I mean, this comes from the emperor of Rome. It says in book 5 in the Meditations, gives us a sense of how great this man was. It says, consider all that you have gone through and all that you have survived, he writes, and that the story of your life is done. Your assignment is complete. What matters, he asks? What should he be proud of? It's not pleasure or achievement. That's for sure. As specifically congratulates himself for temptations he resisted, honors he turned down. He puts forward this metric. Marcus Aurelius says, when it's all over with, when life is done, your story's over, your book is being closed, ask yourself this question: how many unkind people have you been kind to? What a wonderful measure, Ryan Holiday writes. Life is full of jerks. It's full of people who put achievement and pleasure above everything else. Not only do we have to not do that, but we should pride ourselves on our patience and our tolerance. We should pride ourselves in our ability to put up with these people, to be able to be nice to the people that are not nice, to be able to turn, away from hate and bitterness. The world has enough of these kind of folks. It has enough unkindness. Let's not add to it. That was Ryan ended it that way. But Marcus Aurelius says, when your story's over, we need to ask, how many unkind people have we been kind to? And that was a ruler of the world at the time of that, in book 5. And I think about that sometimes when I'm having difficulties at work with some people that, have attitude issues, kind of towards you. You can kind of tell when some people don't like you, and then you become a thorn in their flesh when you say good morning and hope your day goes good. But Marcus Aurelius says, how many unkind people have we been kind to?
Mm.
And that again, it lines up 100% with the sages of Israel. And how can I say this? Because in the tradition of the Torah, the sages teaches when we pass from this earth and we all will go and stand before the heavenly court. And the sages of Israel has asked, what will be the first question that the great judge will ask you? How did you do your business on earth? Meaning, how did you treat others? And that what Marcus Aurelius says is, you close your book, how many unkind people have you been kind to? Then you appear before the great judge, the creator, and he asks you, how well did you handle your relationship with other people? How did you do business on earth? All that, I mean, this wisdom is just keeps just lining up and lining up with the sages of Israel.
Mm.
And then that's what I believe Seneca says, wisdom doesn't belong to any one man.
Mm.
So I'll leave it at that note.
Thank you, Terry. Much appreciated.
Mm.
So
Sorry I went over again.
it's all right. That's good, actually.
I really would
Good.
like to get this down to about 45 minutes, but it's kind of hard for an ex-Pentecostal preacher.
Well, if it takes what it takes, and
We'll have some shorter ones. But these last few, like I said, between 15 and 19, it's been amazing.
okay. So if you'd like to contact us, outreachnoah@gmail.com. If you enjoy the content you get through the YouTube channel, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, Outreach Noah. Head on over to A Simple Walk, our Facebook page, and Veronica's Facebook page, Simply Noahide, and keep in touch with everything that goes on there. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank y'all for coming back. See y'all
Thank
next
you.
week. God willing.
See y'all next week.
Bye.
Bye.